It's a treat to be here for the British Council. 42 years ago, almost to the day, I came over here as a Marshall Scholar, courtesy of the British government, and got my graduate education here. So it's wonderful to be back with both the young people here and the older leaders and the younger leaders. So this is a treat. So I'm going to speak to you this morning about my book, Thank You for Being Late, An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Accelerations. The first question I always get from people when they hear the title of the book is, where does the title come from? Thank you for being late. It actually comes from meeting people for breakfast in Washington, D.C., where I live. I don't like to waste breakfast when I'm downtown eating alone. I like to be able to learn with someone. And every once in a while, someone comes 10, 15 minutes late. And they'd say, Tom, I'm really sorry. It was the weather, the traffic, the subway, the dog ate my homework. And one day, about 3.5 years ago, one of these people, Peter Corcell, an energy entrepreneur, came 15 minutes late and did the usual, Tom, I'm really sorry. The weather, the traffic, the subway, the dog ate my homework. And I spontaneously said to him, actually, Peter, thank you for being late. Because you were late, I've been eavesdropping on their conversation. Fascinating. I've been people watching the lobby. Fantastic. And best of all, I just connected two ideas I've been struggling with for a month. So thank you for being late. That's how it came out. And people started to get into it after a while. They'd say, what? Well, you're welcome. Because they understood. I was actually giving them permission to pause, slow down, to reflect. In fact, my favorite quote from the front of the book comes from my teacher and friend, Dov Seidman, who says, when you press the pause button on a computer, it stops. But when you press the pause button on a human being, it starts. That's when it starts to reflect, rethink, and reimagine. And boy, don't we need to do a lot of that right now. Now, this book was actually triggered when I paused and engaged with someone I wouldn't normally engage with. So I actually live in Bethesda, Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C., and I work out of the New York Times Washington Bureau. And about once a week, I take the subway to work. And that means driving from my home in Bethesda to downtown Bethesda, and I park in the public parking garage beneath the Bethesda Hyatt. And I take the red line into Washington, D.C. to the New York Times Bureau. And I did that some 3.5 years ago now, parked in the parking lot, took the subway in, spent the day at work, came back to the parking lot, got my car, had my time-stamped ticket, drove to the cashier's booth, handed it to the cashier. He looked at it and looked at me and said, I know who you are. I said, great. He said, I read your column. I said, great. Parking guy reads my column. He said, I don't always agree. I thought, get me out of here. But I said, actually, that's good. It means you always have to check. And I drove off thinking, hey, parking guy reads my column. That's great. Anyways, a week later, I took my weekly subway trip in, parking lot, car, red line, DC, day, red line back, car, timestamp ticket, cashier's booth, same guys there. This time he says, Mr. Friedman, I have my own blog. Would you read my blog? I thought, oh my God, the parking guy is now my competitor? What just happened? So I said, well, look, write it down for me and I'll look it up. So he tore off a piece of receipt paper and he wrote on it, odanambi.com. I got home, I fired up my computer, I called it up immediately. Turns out he's Ethiopian. Writes about the Ethiopian people from the perspective of the Oromo people, real democracy advocate. It was kind of rough, but it wasn't a bad blog. I thought about him for a couple days. I shared it with my wife, and I eventually concluded this was a sign from God that I should pause and engage this guy. But I didn't have his email. So the only way I could do it was park in the parking garage every day. So I did that for 4 days. We eventually overlapped at 7 in the morning again. I stopped my car under the gate of the garage so it couldn't come down. I got out of my car. I said, Ayile, now I know his name, Ayile Bogia. Ayile, I want your email. And he gladly gave it to me. And that evening, we began an email exchange which I have saved, and they're in the front of the book. It's kind of funny. But I basically said to him, I have a proposition for you. I will teach you how to write a column in the New York Times if you will tell me your life story. And he basically said, I see you're proposing a deal. I like this deal. Okay. So we agreed to meet 2 weeks later at Pete's Coffee House in Bethesda. I came with a 6-page memo on how to write a column for the New York Times, which is what I do, done for the last 21 years. And he came with his life story. It's a wonderful story. He was a graduate of Haile Selassie University in Addis Ababa in economics, was a political activist on behalf of the Oromo people, real democracy advocate. The regime in Ethiopia kicked him out of the country. We welcomed him in America as a political exile. Yes, we used to do that. He had been blogging on Ethiopian websites, but he found they were just too slow. They wouldn't turn his stuff around fast enough. So he decided to start his own blog. And now, Mr. Friedman, I feel empowered. His Google metrics say he's read in 30 different countries. This is my parking guy. You gotta love a parking guy who knows his Google metrics. 30 different countries. And it's a wonderful story about how anybody today can participate in the global conversation. And we've since become friends. I then presented him with a 6-page memo on how to write a column, and we went over it in 3 subsequent meetings at Pete's Coffee House. I basically explained to him that a news story is meant to inform. I could write a news story about this global leaders event, and Kieran would tell me whether I informed better or worse. But a column, an opinion piece, what I write, is meant to provoke. So I'm either in the heating business or the lighting business. That's what I do. I either do a heating or a lighting. I'm either stoking up an emotion in you, or I'm illuminating something for you. And if I do it right, I will produce heat or light. I'll produce a reaction. I know I produce a reaction when readers say to me, I read your column and I never looked at it that way before. That's good. They say to you, I never connected those things. That's good. That's good. They'll say, I didn't know that. That's good. You give people some light. Yeah. Your favorite, you live for this as a columnist. It happens 4 times a year. Someone will read your column and say, Mr. Friedman, you said exactly what I felt but didn't know how to say. God bless you. God bless you. They'll read your column and say, I want to kill you dead, you and all your offspring. I get that as well. That tells me I produce some heat. But in any event, that's what a column is aiming to do, to produce heat or light. And I explained to Yile, though, that to produce heat and light in a column requires a chemical reaction. And you have to combine 3 chemicals. First is, what is your value set? What are the principles and values you are promoting as a columnist? Are you a communist, a capitalist, a neocon, a neoliberal, a libertarian, a Marxist, a Keynesian? What are the set of values you're pushing? Second, how do you think the machine works? So the machine is my shorthand for what are the biggest forces shaping more things in more places, in more ways, on more days. Because as a columnist, I'm always carrying around in my head a working hypothesis of how the big gears and pulleys of the world work. Why? Because I'm trying to take my values and push the machine in that direction. And if I don't know how the machine works, I either won't push it, or I'll push it in the wrong direction. And lastly, what have you learned about people and culture? Because there's no column without people, and there are no people without culture. How does the machine affect different people and culture, and how do they come back and affect the machine? Now, if you stir those 3 things together, let it rise, bake for 45 minutes. If you do it right, you will produce a column that produces heat or light. Well, the more I explained this to Ayile, I'd never done it before until we had this encounter, the more I started to say to myself, well, if that's what a column's about, what's my value set? Those of you who read me know I have a very quirky set of values. That's because my column philosophy doesn't come from a library or philosopher. It comes actually from the little town in Minnesota, where I grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, at a time and place where politics worked. Had a big impact on me. How do I think the machine works today? And what have I learned about people and culture in 40 years as a journalist at the New York Times? And that's what I decided to write this book about. So the first half is about how the machine works, and the second half is about how this machine is not just changing your world, it's fundamentally reshaping your world. And it's reshaping 5 realms: politics, geopolitics, ethics, the community, and geopolitics, politics, ethics, the community, and the workplace. So let's talk about both halves of the book. How does the machine work today? Well, I think what is shaping more things in more places, in more ways, and more days is that we are in the middle of 3 nonlinear accelerations all at the same time with the 3 largest forces on the planet, which I call the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law. So Mother Nature for me is climate change, biodiversity loss, and population growth in the developing world. If you put those on a graph, you know what they look like? They look like a big hockey stick. So this is what it looks like on a graph. This is 2 pictures of Glacier National Park in America, 1913, 2012. Okay. Lake Chad, 1963, 2001. This is global average temperature. That's a hockey stick. Sorry, backwards, forwards. I'll get this right. I got it now. These are instances of extreme weather. Another hockey stick. This is world population growth. That's a hockey stick. So we're in the middle of a giant acceleration in Mother Nature. The market for me is digital globalization, not your parents' globalization. That was containers on ships and planes. What's driving globalization today is how everything is being digitized and globalized through Amazon or PayPal or Facebook or Twitter. If you put digital globalization on a graph, it looks like a hockey stick. That's total data consumed per month. That's mobile cellular subscriptions in the US. Pick whichever hockey stick you like. And Moore's Law was coined by Gordon Moore in 1965. He was an engineer, one of the co-founders of Intel, the chip maker. And in 1965, Gordon Moore wrote a famous article in Electronics magazine in which he predicted that the speed and power of microchips would double roughly every 24 months. And 52 years later, Moore's Law is alive and well. It's now closer to 30 months, but never mind. The speed and power of microchips is doubling roughly still every 30 months. And if you put Moore's Law on a graph, that's what it looks like, another hockey stick. So we're actually in the middle of 3 hockey stick accelerations, all at the same time, with the 3 largest forces on the planet, the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law, and they're all interacting with each other. Because more Moore's Law drives more globalization drives more climate change, and more solutions. And they aren't just changing your world. They are reshaping your world in a fundamental way. So I'm not going to talk about the Mother Nature acceleration. I'm not going to talk about the market, the digital acceleration. I want to talk about, in my brief time this morning, the Moore's Law acceleration, because it's the driver of them all. Now, one of the hardest things for the human mind to grasp is actually the power of something that grows exponentially, because we so rarely encounter it. So Andy McAfee and Eric Brynjolfsson, in their book, The Second Machine Age, tell a story to illustrate this. It's a story often told in Silicon Valley of the man who invented the game of chess. And he gave the game to the king. King loved it and said, "How can I reward you, good sir?" And the man said, "Well, your highness, actually all I want to do is be able to feed my family." So he said, "Well, what would you like?" He said, "I'd just like you to take 1 grain of rice and put it on the first square of this chessboard. Put 2 on the second, 4 on the next, 8 on the next, 16 on the next, 32 on the next, and just keep doubling it. My family will be fine." King said, "It shall be done." Not realizing that when you double something 63 times, the number you get is roughly 18 quintillion, which was more rice than existed in the whole world. What Andy and Eric point out is, in terms of microchips, we just entered the second half of the chessboard, where the numbers and the doubling starts to get really big, and you start to see some really funky stuff, like cars that can drive themselves, and machines that can beat any human in chess, Jeopardy, or Go. So your phones and your computers are actually today running on an Intel 14 nanometer chip. That 14 nanometer chip has 37.5 million transistors per square millimeter. Your eye cannot see it. Under Moore's law, at the end of 2017, Intel will begin shipping its 10 nanometer chip. It will have 100 million transistors per square millimeter. Now, what's the difference between a chip with 37.5 million transistors per square millimeter and one with 100 million? It's the difference between a self-driving car that needs the whole trunk of the car to take the brains of that car, to a self-driving car that will just need a little box under the front seat. And Intel already knows how it's going to produce its 7 nanometer chip. So if you think the world is fast now, just wait until the end of the year. To try to explain all this in a graphic way, Intel's engineers once took a 1971 Volkswagen Beetle, and they said, what if this Volkswagen Beetle had improved at the same rate of Moore's law? What would it be like today? Well, they determined that that Volkswagen Beetle today would go 300,000 miles an hour. It would get 2 million miles per gallon, and it would cost you 4 cents. You'd be able to drive it your entire life on 1 tank of gas. That is the power of the technological exponential now driving our lives. Now, my chapter on Moore's law is called, What the Hell Happened in 2007? What the hell happened in 2007? 2007, what's this guy talking about? Such an innocuous year. What happened in 2007? Well, the year was kicked off in 2007, January of 2007, at the Moscone Center in San Francisco, when one Steve Jobs introduced the first iPhone in January of 2007, beginning a process at which we're about halfway through putting into the hands of every person on the planet a handheld computer with more compute power in it than the Apollo space mission that doubles as a phone and a camera. That's how the year kicked off. In 2007, a company called Facebook opened its platform, actually late 2006, to anyone with a registered email address. It broke out of high schools and universities, and in 2007, Facebook went global. In 2007, a company called Twitter split off on its own independent platform and went global. In 2007, the most important software you've never heard of, called Hadoop, named after the founder's son's toy elephant, was launched into the wild. Hadoop is what enables 1 million computers to work together as if they're one, to merge all their compute power together. That's called big data. Hadoop was born in 2007. It actually wasn't invented by the Hadoop engineers. The algorithms were actually invented by Google. They're called GFS and MapReduce. But as Doug Cutting, the founder of Hadoop, explains in the book, Google lives in the future and sends us letters back home. And what Google did was create a trail of breadcrumbs from its two big data algorithms, GFS and MapReduce, that the open source computing community could reverse engineer and create a free public version of big data. It's called Hadoop. This parliament is running Hadoop. They just don't know it. In 2007, the second most important software you've never heard of, called VMware, went public. VMware was an algorithm that enabled any operating system to work on any computer. That's what enabled cloud computing. In 2007, the third most important software you've never heard of, called GitHub, opened its doors. GitHub today is the largest repository of open source software in the world with 14 million users. This parliament's also running GitHub, and they don't know it. In 2007, see if we can get this up. Oh, keep going backwards. This is a graph on the cost of sequencing a human genome. In 2001, it cost $100 million to sequence a human genome. In 2005, it fell to $10 million. And then you'll notice it goes over a cliff like an EKG heading for a heart attack. In what year? 2007. It falls to $10,000 from $100 million. In 2007, this company called Google bought a little-known TV company called YouTube. And in 2007, this same company, Google, launched into the wild its own operating system called Android. In 2007, a guy up in Seattle named Jeff Bezos launched the world's first ebook reader called the Kindle. And in 2007, IBM launched the world's first cognitive computer called Watson. In 2007, 3 design students in San Francisco were attending the design conference that year, and they noticed all the hotel rooms were sold out. But one of them had 3 spare air mattresses. And they thought it might be cool if they tried to rent those air mattresses out to people who couldn't get hotel rooms. And it worked out so well that in 2007, they started a company called Airbnb. Yeah, the reason it's called Airbnb was because of its founding 3 air mattresses. In 2007, solar energy took off for the first time. You see the hockey stick kicks off that year, as did a process for extracting natural gas from tight shale called fracking. Between 2006 and 2008, America's total natural gas reserves increased 35%. That's a staggering number in a basically 18-month period. This is a picture of what social networks look like on a graph. So that white line, that's the cost of generating a megabit of data. You'll notice that it goes straight down like another EKG heading for a heart attack in 2007. The blue line is the speed of transmitting that data. And you'll notice it goes up and the 2 lines cross in 2008. Close enough, as we say, for government work. That is a graph of cloud computing. You'll notice the first year data show up is 2008. Which means the cloud was born in 2007. In 2007, Intel, for the first time, went off silicon to extend Moore's law. They introduced non-silicon materials into their microchips. In 2007, the internet, actually late 2006, the internet crossed 1 billion users. Seems to have been a tipping point. In 2005, Michael Dell, the founder of Dell Computers, retired. And in 2007, he decided he better come back to work. Turns out, friends, 2007 may be understood in time as the single greatest technological inflection point since Gutenberg invented the printing press. And we all completely missed it. Why? Because of 2008. Yeah, right when our physical technologies just took off, like we were on a moving sidewalk at Heathrow that suddenly went from 5 to 50 miles an hour, right when that happened, all of our social technologies, the learning reform, the management reform, the political reform, the regulatory reform that you would need to keep up with that acceleration, everything froze because we entered the deepest recession since 1929. And in that dislocation, a lot of Brexit and Trump voters were born. You know, I always remind people, someone was alive when Gutenberg invented the printing press. Someone was alive then. And you can bet, some monk said to some priest, when they saw that printing press, no, that's really cool. That's really cool. You mean I don't have to write all these Bibles out longhand anymore? I can actually stamp them out? Well, you're alive. I believe you're alive at a similar technological inflection point. So what actually happened in 2007? What actually happened is that your computer has 5 key components. It's got that Moore's Law microchip. It's got a Moore's Law storage chip. It's got networking. It's got software, and it has a sensor. It has a camera. And what I trace in the book is how all 5 have actually been in a Moore's Law. And what happened in 2007 is that they all melded together in 2007 to create this thing we call the cloud. The cloud. But I never use the term the cloud in my book because it sounds so soft, so cuddly, so fluffy, so benign. Sounds like a Joni Mitchell song. I've looked at clouds from both sides. This ain't no cloud, folks. This is what I call in the book a supernova. For the scientists, science students among you will know the supernova is an explosion of a star. It's the largest release of energy in the natural world. And I think what happened in 2007 was a release of energy because of this into the hands of men, women, and machines, the likes of which we have never seen before. And overnight, it changed 4 kinds of power. It changed the power of one. Oh my God, what one person can now do today as a maker or a breaker is like anything we've ever seen before. We have a president in America who can sit in his pajamas in the West Wing of the White House and now tweet directly to 1 billion people around the planet without an editor, a libel lawyer, or a filter. Okay? Some would say without a brain, but I didn't say that, okay? But here's what's really scary. The head of ISIS can do the exact same thing from Raqqa province in Syria or the border of Lake Chad. The power of one to be a maker or a breaker today has exploded. The power of machines have exploded. Machines today are acquiring all 5 senses. We have never lived in a world where machines had all 5 senses. Now, we crossed that line on February 14th, 2011, on, of all places, a game show, an American game show. There were 3 contestants on this show. 2 were the all-time Jeopardy champions. And the 3rd contestant simply went by his last name, Mr. Watson. Mr. Watson, of course, wasn't a human. He was IBM's cognitive computer. Mr. Watson passed on the first question, but he buzzed in before the 2 humans on the second question. See if you can get it. The question was, it's worn on the foot of a horse and used by a dealer in a casino. And in under 2.5 seconds, Mr. Watson, the computer, said in perfect Jeopardy style, "What is a shoe?" What is a shoe? And for the first time, we all watched live on TV a cognitive computer figure out a pun faster than 2 human beings. And the world kind of hasn't been the same since. The power of machines has changed. The power of flows have changed. Ideas now flow and circulate and change at a speed we've never seen before. Where did you want to build your town in the Middle Ages? You wanted to build your town on a river. Why? Because that river brought you food, brought you transport, brought you power, and brought you ideas. You want to build your town on the Amazon. Where do you want to build your town today? On Amazon.com. You want to build it on the flows, the digital flows now, because they will provide you ideas and power and sustenance. Ideas now flow and circulate at a pace we've never seen before. And lastly, it's not just flows that are changing. It's not just flows. It's also simply the power of one to change, to leverage all of these things. It's the power of many that has changed. Because when we get men and women, this amplified by machines, what happens is that the power of many to reshape the world gets dramatically amplified. And that's why the new climate era has been named for us, the Anthropocene, because we are now the biggest forcing function on and in nature. Those 4 changes in power, friends, they aren't just changing your world. They are fundamentally reshaping your world. And they're reshaping these 5 realms: politics, geopolitics, ethics, community, and the workplace. So let's talk about those reshapings. First of all, they're reshaping the workplace that all of you are now in. So I have a graph to illustrate this. I was out at Google X when I was researching my book, and Astro Teller, who is chief astronaut of Google X, their CEO, I laid my thesis out to him, and he went over to a whiteboard, and he drew this simple, crude graph. I said, "What's that, Astro?" He said, "Well, that blue line across the middle, that's the average rate at which human beings adapt to change over time." So you'll notice it has a positive slope, but it's very gradual. That's how we, humans and societies, adapt to change over time. The white line is technology. So you'll notice it's very flat at this end. That's because if you were born in the 11th century or the 12th century, your bow and arrow did not get better over a whole century. We forget there was no bow and arrow 2.0 in the 12th century, okay? Line was very flat. But then we got Copernicus and Galileo and the scientific revolution, then Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Intel. The line starts to go straight north. And then Astro drew that little diamond there. And I said, "What's that, Astro?" He said, "That's where we are. We're at a point now where technology is evolving faster than the average human being and society can adapt to." Then he got out a third magic marker, and he drew that little dotted line there. And I said, "What's that, Astro?" And he said, "Tom, that's learning faster and governing smarter." And that is the challenge of leaders today. How do we get our people to learn faster and govern smarter to meet technology where it's going? Because this is where it's going. You see that white line? That's called people who work with their hands. You see that blue line? That's called people who work with their minds. You can see which way those 2 lines are going. So that's why my chapter on the workplace is called How We Turn AI into IA. How do we turn artificial intelligence into intelligent assistance, ANCE, intelligent assistance, ANTS, and intelligent algorithms so more people can live at a higher pace of acceleration? That is the single greatest education and political challenge to every one of your societies. So let me give you an example of what I mean of each one. Intelligent assistance. My example for that is the Human Resources Department at AT&T, the giant American telecom company. AT&T has 330,000 employees. It lives right next to the supernova in the ultra-competitive global telecom space. Wakes up every morning competing with Verizon and Deutsche Telekom and BT. Hyper-competitive. Pretty good chance that whatever is happening in the Human Resources Department at AT&T is coming to a neighborhood near you. So what's going on at AT&T's HR department? Well, AT&T begins every year with its CEO, Randall Stephenson, giving a pretty radical speech right now on where the company is going, what businesses it's going to be in, and what skills you need to be an AT&T employee that year. Then they put all their managers, 110,000 people, on their own in-house LinkedIn system. So I'm there, I'm an AT&T employee, I'm a manager, I'm in their LinkedIn system, and they can actually see what education and skill sets I have. Then they determine that there are 10 skill sets you need, I'm making up the number, it's roughly 10, to be a rising employee at AT&T that year. And it turns out, Tom Friedman, AT&T employee, I have 7 of the 10, but I'm missing 3. Then they came to me and said, Tom, we've created an in-house university with Udacity, the online learning platform, with nano degrees for all 10 skill sets. But you're missing 3. But no problem. Here's our deal with you, Tom. We will give you up to $8,000 a year to take the courses for the skill sets you're missing. In fact, we heard you're interested in writing. If you want to take a literature course, we'll pay for that as well. In fact, if you want to take our $6,000 a year online master's degree in computer science that we created with Georgia Tech, we'll pay for that as well. There's just one condition, Mr. Friedman. You have to take these courses at home, on your own time, at night and on weekends, not on company time. Now, if I say to AT&T, you know what, I've climbed up one too many telephone poles. I'm not up for doing homework at night. AT&T now has a wonderful severance package for me, but I will not be working at AT&T much longer. What is AT&T's social contract with their employees? It's very simple. You can be a lifelong employee at AT&T still, but now only if you are a lifelong learner. If you are not ready to be a lifelong learner, you can no longer be a lifelong employee at AT&T, and that, my friends, is the social contract coming to a neighborhood near you. The days when you could get a 4-year college degree and expect to dine out on that for the 30 years of your working career, that is so over. There's stuff you'll learn in your first year of college that will now be outdated by your 4th in the age of acceleration. And that's why my teacher and friend Heather McGowan likes to tell parents, parents, never ask your kids what you want to be when you grow up. Oh, that is so 1950s. Because whatever it is, unless it's policeman or fireman, ain't going to be here when your kid grows up. Only ask your kid today how you want to be when you grow up. Will you be predisposed to lifelong learning? Will you have an agile learning mindset? It's not what you want to be, it's how you want to be. And that leads to one of the central things that is roiling politics in this country, in my country, and all of your countries. It's something I learned from Marina Gorbis, who runs the Institute of the Future at Palo Alto. Marina likes to say, you know, 15 years ago, we all spoke about the digital divide. If this meeting were held 15 years ago, we'd be talking about that. We'd be talking about the fact that UK, London has internet, Northern England doesn't. Upstate New York doesn't have internet, New York City doesn't. America has it, parts of Africa don't. We'd be talking about the digital divide. Today, friends, the digital divide is on its way out. It hasn't disappeared yet, but it's increasingly disappearing. In 5 years, I believe it'll be gone. And when the digital divide is gone, there's only one divide we will be talking about, the self-motivation divide. Who has the self-motivation to be a lifelong learner at a time when everyone's going to be connected and mom and dad are not there to say, Tommy, have you done your homework? And one of the things that's roiling the world right now, in this country, in my country, in your countries, is the fact that a lot of people were born and raised to do what they were told. And in fact, they built my country. They built America, the great middle class. We told them what to do after World War II, and they did it really well, and they did it with dedication. Unfortunately today, that is not enough anymore. And a lot of people are not built to be learning and relearning every 4 years. And it is really roiling our politics. So that's what intelligent assistance is all about. Intelligent assistant. My example of that is Qualcomm. Qualcomm is another company you've probably not heard much about. That's because they just made the inside of your cell phone. They made the chips and the software. Your iPhone, the inside was not made by Apple. It was made by Qualcomm. That's why Apple is always suing Qualcomm over patents, okay? So they have a 64-building campus out in San Diego. And 3 years ago, they took 6 of their buildings and they put sensors everywhere, on every light, every cooling, heating system, every faucet, every door, window, computer. They put sensors on everything, and they beam all that data up to the cloud, up to the supernova, and then they beam it down onto an iPad for their janitors with an incredibly user-friendly interface. So if I leave my computer on or a pipe bursts above my head, the janitors know it before I do, and they just swipe down to see how to fix it or who to call to repair it. Qualcomm turned their janitors into maintenance technologists. Their janitors now give tours to foreign visitors. What do you think that does for the dignity of a janitor? Because he or she now has a digital assistant, an intelligent assistant, enabling them to learn faster and work smarter. My last example is intelligent algorithm. Now, my example of this is the partnership between the College Board. They're the people who administer the PSAT and SAT exams, which we have in America to get into college. Some of you may have had to go through this experience. And Khan Academy, the online learning platform. So you may know the story in America in 11th grade of high school. We all have to take, those who want to go to college, a PSAT, practice SAT exam, to determine our math and verbal skills. And that's a practice exam. So in 12th grade, we take the SAT, and it tells us whether we're going to get into Harvard or Wichita State. What a lot of American parents do who can afford it is they go out and hire a tutor for $200 an hour to goose their kids' scores in math and verbal, okay? That's called a completely rigged game. A completely rigged game because if you're a family or you come from a neighborhood, you didn't even know you can do this, let alone have the $200 an hour to do it, you're at a real disadvantage. So 3 years ago, the College Board, who administered the SAT, and Sal Khan from Khan Academy, created an intelligent algorithm for free online SAT and PSAT prep. The way it works is I take my PSAT in 11th grade, I get the results back, and they say, Tom, you did really, really well in verbal. You could actually be a journalist. But you do have a problem, Tom, with math. In fact, specifically, as we looked at your exam results, you have a problem with fractions and right angles. It then takes me to a practice site just for fractions and right angles, just for my precise weakness. If I do well there, it takes me to another practice site that says in 12th grade, I could be an AP in advanced math. Me? In advanced math? Really? Yeah. I never heard of anybody in advanced math. No one in my family, no one in my neighborhood was in advanced math. I could be, yeah, you could be in advanced math. If I do well there, it takes me to another site with 180 college scholarships. Last year, 3 million American kids got free PSAT and SAT prep on this intelligent algorithm. Last example is opportunity at work. So in my country, we have 32 million Americans who started college but never finished. Huge waste of human talent. Because they go to apply for a job, and the employer says, where's your BA? They say, I got no BA, no BA, no jobby. No BA, no jobby, sorry. So in the last few years, a group of social organizations have come together and created intelligent algorithms like opportunity at work. The way it works is I can go there now with my 1 year, 2 year, 2.5, 3.5 years of college. They test what I actually learned in that time. And then they partner with companies that are ready to hire me on the basis of what I actually know and can do, not on the basis of a BA. So in my book, I profiled an African-American woman named Lashana Lewis, who went to Michigan Tech and studied computer science for 3.5 years, had to drop out of college for family reasons, ended up driving a bus to and from a computer school, couldn't make that up, and working on the help desk at a law firm, helping lawyers rediscover their lost passwords. She got connected to opportunity at work. They slotted her in at MasterCard, the credit card company, as a systems engineer. Today, she's now a senior systems engineer at MasterCard. And in her interview in my book, in the last line, she says, "And Mr. Friedman, I still don't have my BA." That is an intelligent algorithm that has allowed her to live and thrive at a higher rate of acceleration. Now I'm going to make a bet with all of you. This is what I say to my American audiences. I'm going to bet you haven't heard of any of this. And that's because you were following our last election, where Bernie Sanders' big idea to help Americans in the age of acceleration was to tear down the 6 biggest global banks. Donald Trump's big idea was to tear down Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton's big idea was to direct you to her website, www.hillaryclinton.com. In fact, there is massive innovation going on this pathway of education to work, and nobody is telling anybody about it. We'd rather rail against Brexit or Trump or NAFTA. In fact, there is so much innovation going on this pathway that I almost thought of writing my book just about that. In fact, there's so much innovation going on that nothing actually has to be invented. Whatever you can think of, I can tell you somebody's already doing it. We just need to find these, scale, and share them. So that gets to politics. How is politics being reshaped in the age of acceleration? Well, my chapter on this is called Mother Nature's Political Party. Because, friends, we're in the middle of not one, we're in the middle of 3 climate changes at once. We're in the middle of a change of the climate. We're going from later to now. When I was growing up, I'm 64, I'm an old fuddy-duddy. When I was growing up in Minnesota, later was when I could clean that lake, fix that river, save that forest, rescue that orangutan. I could do it now or I could do it later. Well, for your generation, later is officially over. Later will now be too late. So whatever you're going to save, please save it now. Because later will be too late. That's a climate change. We're in the middle of a change in the climate of globalization. We're going from a world that was interconnected to a world that's interdependent. Oh, that's a big change. Because in an interdependent world, your friends, first of all, can kill you faster than your enemies. If Greek and Italian banks go under, I got news for you, the British Council won't be holding this program next year. Greece and Italy can kill the UK. Greece and Italy, wait a minute, they're in NATO, they're in the EU, they're our ally. Yeah, your friends can now kill you faster than your enemies in an interdependent world, and your rivals falling becomes more dangerous than your rivals rising. If China takes 6 more islands in the South China Sea, personally, I couldn't care less. If China loses 6% growth, this meeting doesn't happen. Your rivals falling now becomes more dangerous than your rivals rising. That is a climate change. And we're going through a change in the climate of technology. Every company can and therefore must, because in a world of technology, whatever can be done will be done. The only question is, will it be done by you or to you? Every company today can analyze, optimize, prophesize, customize, and digitize, automatize any job, product, or service. They can analyze, they can find the needle in the haystack with big data as the norm now, not the exception. They can see patterns they could never see before. They can optimize. I flew over here on British Airways. Rolls-Royce was telling British Airways what altitude to fly every mile of that trip to get the optimal energy efficiency out of their Rolls-Royce engines, which are connected by sensors in real time to Rolls-Royce. I can optimize anything now. I can prophesize. IBM Watson's been running an ad in America of a repairman shows up at a building like this, says to the doorman, "I'm here to fix the elevator." And the doorman says, "The elevator's not broken." And the IBM repairman says, "I know, but it will be in 6 weeks." I can now prophesize. I can do predictive analytics. I can tell you just what you're going to buy when you next go on Amazon. I can customize just for you. Just for those of you who have a blue eye and a brown eye, I can prophesize for. I can customize for you. And lastly, I can digitize and automatize anything. That is a climate change, friends. We're in the middle of 3 climate changes at once. What do you want when the climate changes? You want 2 things. You want resilience. You need to be able to take a blow because stuff happens when the climate changes. And you want propulsion. You want to be able to go ahead. You don't want to just be curled up in a ball under your bed because the climate's changing, waiting for it to stop. Because it's not going to stop. So I thought to myself, who do I interview about how to get resilience and propulsion when the climate changes? And then I realized I knew this woman. She was 3.8 billion years old. Her name was Mother Nature, and she dealt with more climate changes than anybody. So I called her up, made an appointment, went out to see her. I sat her down, I said, Mother Nature, how do you produce resilience and propulsion when the climate changes? She said, well, Tom, I got to tell you, everything I do unconsciously. But these are my strategies. First of all, she said, I'm incredibly adaptive. In my world, it's not the strongest, it's not the smartest who survive, it's the most adaptive when the climate's changing. Secondly, she said, I'm incredibly entrepreneurial. Wherever I see a blank space in nature, I fill it with a plant or animal perfectly adapted to that niche. I'm incredibly entrepreneurial. Third, she said, I'm incredibly diverse. Oh God, I'm the most pluralistic person you've ever met. I try 20 different species, see who wins. I love diversity. In fact, you know what I noticed, she told me? She noticed that her most diverse ecosystems are her most resilient and propulsive ecosystems. She loves pluralism, Mother Nature. She said, I'm the most sustainable person you've also ever met too. Nothing's wasted in my world. Everything is food. Eat food, poop seed. Eat food, poop seed. Nothing is wasted in my world. Fifth, she said, I'm incredibly hybrid and heterodox. I am the most pragmatic person you've ever met. Nothing dogmatic about me. I'll try any different trees with any different soils, any different bees with any different flowers. I'm incredibly hybrid and heterodox. And lastly, she told me, I do believe in the laws of bankruptcy. I kill all my failures. I return them to the great manufacturer in the sky, and I take their energy to nourish my successes. Well, my argument is that in the age of accelerations, the country, the community, the political party that most closely mirrors Mother Nature's political strategies is the one that will thrive in the age of acceleration. And since it was an election year, when I was writing last year, I thought, what the heck? What if Mother Nature were running in the American election in 2016 against Trump and Hillary? What would her political platform look like? So I invented Mother Nature's political party with an 18-point platform. Won't go through it with you now, but suffice it to say, on some issues, I'm to the left of Bernie Sanders. I think we need universal health care in America because I think in the age of acceleration, the world's going to be too fast for more people. So we got to strengthen our trampolines and safety nets to get them back into the game. But at the same time, I am to the right of the Wall Street Journal editorial page because I would abolish all corporate taxes and replace them with a carbon tax, a tax on sugar, a tax on bullets, and a small financial transaction tax. I want to get radically entrepreneurial over here to pay for the safety nets we're going to need over here. Unfortunately, in our politics, if you're for stronger safety nets, you're never for radical entrepreneurship. And if you're for radical entrepreneurship, you're never for stronger safety nets. What would Mother Nature call that? Stupid. That's what she'd call it, okay? She would understand you need to be utterly hybrid and heterodox in this world, that these two things go together, and we have to stop taxing our goods like labor and start taxing our bads like sugar and carbon and bullets because we cannot afford our bads anymore. We just had 2 superstorms in America that are going to cost us $200 billion. 2 storms. So that's my politics. Let me close by talking about 2 other realms that are being reshaped: ethics and the workplace. Ethics. What does ethics have to do with this? Well, my chapter on that subject is called, Is God in Cyberspace? Is God in Cyberspace? Comes from the best question I ever got on book tour. 1999, I'm in Portland, Oregon. I'm lecturing about my first book on globalization called Lexus and the Olive Tree. Young man stands up in the balcony at question time. I can still see him up there. He says, Mr. Friedman, I have a question. Is God in cyberspace? I said, I have no idea. I felt like a complete idiot. So I got home. I called my spiritual teacher. He's a rabbi I got to know when I was the New York Times correspondent in Jerusalem. His name's Zvi Marx, great Talmudic scholar. He now lives in Amsterdam, married to a Dutch priest, interesting character. I tracked him down in Amsterdam. I said, Zvi, I got a question I have never had before. Is God in cyberspace? What should I have said? And he said, well, Tom, in our faith tradition, we have two concepts of the Almighty. One is that is a biblical concept, and it says the Almighty is almighty. He smites evil, and he rewards good. And if that's your view of God, he sure isn't in cyberspace, which is full of pornography, gambling, cheating, lying, prevarication, and now we know fake news. But he said, fortunately, we have a post-biblical view of God that says God manifests himself by how we behave. So if we want God to be in cyberspace, we have to bring him there by how we behave there. Only we can bring God into cyberspace. I really liked his answer. I put it into the paperback edition of Lexus and the Olive Tree. Came out in 2000, where none of you saw it, and it sat there for 20 years. Then I sat down to write this book, and I found myself spontaneously retelling this story. So I finally sat myself down and said, why are you retelling that story? And the answer became very clear to me. It was for two reasons, and one just happened last year. I think 2016 was the year where we started living 51% of our lives in cyberspace. Now it's where we found a date, found a spouse, bought a book, bought a house, got a mortgage, got our news, generated our news, met with our families. We're now living 51% of our lives in cyberspace. And what's my definition of cyberspace? It's a realm where we're all connected and nobody's in charge. That's where we're living our lives now, in a realm where we're all connected, but nobody's in charge. There are no stoplights in cyberspace, you may have noticed. No courts, no police, no 1-800, please stop Putin from hacking my election. And yet that's where we're living our lives. In other words, we're living our lives in a realm, we're increasingly living our lives in a realm that is God-free. And at the same time, because of my accelerations, we're now standing at a moral intersection we have never stood at before as a human species. In 1945, post-Hiroshima, we entered a world where one country could kill all of us. If it had to be one country, I'm glad it was mine, frankly. I think we're now entering a world where one person can kill all of us because of these amplified powers, and at the same time, where all of us could actually fix everything. We've actually never lived in this world before where one of us could kill all of us, and all of us could actually now feed, house, clothe, and educate every person on the planet if we put our mind to it. We've never been to this intersection before where one of us could kill all of us and all of us could fix everything. What does that mean? It means we have never been more godlike as a species than we are today. Well, put those two together. We've never lived more of our lives in a realm that's God-free, and we have never been more godlike. And what does that mean? It means that what every person on the planet thinks, feels, and believes now really matters. And it means everyone has to be in the embrace of sustainable values. At a minimum, the golden rule, which every faith and culture has a version of: do unto others as you wish them to do unto you, because we now live in a world where more people can do unto you from farther away than ever before, and you can do unto others farther away than ever before. Everyone has to be in the embrace of the golden rule. I know what you're thinking. I actually gave this part of my talk as the commencement address at Olin College of Engineering a year ago. And I told the parents there, I know what you're thinking. You paid $200,000 so your kid could get an engineering degree. And they brought in a knucklehead commencement speaker who's advocating the golden rule. Is there anything more naive? And what I told them is what I will tell you. In the age of acceleration, naivete is the new realism. I'll tell you what's really naive. Thinking we're going to be okay with this much amplified power of men, women, and machines if everyone is not in the embrace of the golden rule. Where does the golden rule come from? It comes from two places: strong families and healthy communities. I would not lecture you about strong families. I hope I built one, but I'd never presume to lecture anyone on that subject. But I am an expert on healthy communities because I grew up in one. A little town in Minnesota outside of Minneapolis called St. Louis Park. And that's why that's where my book ends. So I was born in 1953 in Minneapolis. My parents emigrated from the United States from Eastern Europe. My parents were born in Minnesota, in the central part of the United States. Minneapolis in the 40s and 50s was the capital of anti-Semitism in America. My parents couldn't join the golf club or the local driving automobile club until a guy named Hubert Humphrey became mayor and cleaned it out of city government. The Jewish community in Minneapolis all lived in a ghetto with African Americans in the north side of the city. So that's where I was born, so my parents were born. After World War II, the Jews were able to escape, the African Americans couldn't. And the entire Jewish community of Minneapolis ends up moving to one little town called St. Louis Park outside of Minneapolis, the only one that didn't have restricted covenants of where you could buy a house, and had a housing stock that could take them all. So overnight, this little town outside of Minneapolis went from 100% white Protestant Catholic Scandinavian to 20% Jewish, 80% white Protestant Catholic Scandinavian. If Sweden and Israel had a baby, it would be St. Louis Park, okay? This little town. And thus began a fascinating experiment in inclusion. And I tell the story about how we all got to know each other. And there were broken dates and broken hearts and whatnot, but it was an interesting experiment. In the end, we built a pretty interesting little community. I actually went to the same high school, grew up in the same neighborhood with the Coen brothers, the filmmakers. Al Franken, the American senator, Norm Ornstein, the political scientist, Michael Sandel, the political theorist, Sharon Isbin, the guitarist. We have our own Wikipedia page. It was a freaky place. This was not a neighborhood in the Upper West Side of New York. This was a little one high school town in Minnesota, because it had a civic culture that had a huge impact on all of us. The Coen brothers took it into movies, I took it into journalism, Sandel took it into political theory, Franken took it into politics. The Coen brothers movie, A Serious Man, was about our town. If you saw No Country for Old Men, which they won the Academy Award for, there's a scene where Churga blows up a car outside of a drugstore in Mexico in order to go in and steal drugs. And at the end of the scene, the camera pans to the drugstore, and it's called Mike Zoss Drugs. That was our little St. Louis Park drugstore. So I tell the story about how we all got to know each other and produce this ethic that's called Minnesota Nice. Minnesota Nice. Hard to explain if you've not been to Minnesota. I can give you a couple examples. While I was home working on the book, I was at a best friend's wedding. My friend, our mutual friend, Jay came, and Jay was sitting next to me at the wedding, and he told me that that day his wife, Eileen, was driving in the ring road around Minneapolis, and she came home and said, "Jay, a driver almost drove me off the road." And Eileen told Jay she was so mad, I almost honked. Okay? That's Minnesota for road rage, okay? There was a Jewish mafia in Minnesota in the 30s and 40s. My dad grew up with these guys. He wasn't in the mafia, I swear, but he knew a lot of these guys. And when I was about 6 years old, 5 or 6, my dad came home one day and told me one of his closest friends had been arrested. And like, when you're a 5 or 6-year-old kid and your dad knows someone who went to jail, that just like freaks you out. Which is why I never forgot what my dad said when I said, "Dad, what did he do?" And he said, "Son, he was shopping in a store before it was open." Okay. That's That's Minnesota for breaking and entering, okay? So, anyways, I left Minnesota in 1971. I came here in 1975 to go to graduate school. And I came back 40 years later. I went into the world in 71, and I came back 40 years later to write this book. And I discovered, having left Minnesota to discover the world had now discovered St. Louis Park. My high school is now 50% white, Protestant, Catholic, Scandinavian. It's 10% Jewish, it's 10% Latino, and 30% Somali. So the same school, same neighborhood that took the Jews, 40 years later took the Somali refugees. Now the inclusion challenge is much deeper, religiously and racially. And I tell the story about how they're doing today, 40 years later. It's a struggle, it's hard, it's not easy. We have real issues. But my high school is still rated the 6th best high school in the state of Minnesota. They're doing pretty well. And what has impressed me about communities like mine, and I'm just using it as a tiny example, is that not that the problems are easy, but it's the number of people who want to get caught trying. The number of people who want to get caught trying. I have a teacher, Amory Lovins. He's a physicist, helped me with the physics on this book. And whenever people ask Amory, are you an optimist or a pessimist? He says, I'm neither, because they're just two different forms of fatalism. Everything will be great. Everything will be awful. Amory says, I believe in applied hope. I believe in applied hope. And what makes me an optimist is the number of people I see applying hope at the community level in my country. If you want to be an optimist about America today, stand on your head, because the country looks so much better from the bottom up than from the top down. Okay. And that's why my book ends, as my talk does, with a theme song. My book has a theme song. I actually thought, could I buy this song? So when you open the book, it would play this song like a Hallmark card plays Happy Birthday. And the song is by one of my favorite singers, Brandi Carlile. She's a wonderful country folk singer. And the song is called The I, E-Y-E. And it is, I believe, the anthem of our time. The main refrain is, I wrapped my love around you like a chain, but I never was afraid that it could die. You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye. See, my 3 accelerations, they're a hurricane. We have politicians, in fact, the president of my country is one of them, who wants to build a wall against the hurricane. I want to build an eye that moves with the storm, draws energy from it, but creates a platform of dynamic stability, the healthy community, where people can feel connected, protected, and respected. I think the great struggle in American politics, and I suspect in all of your politics, is going to be between the wall people and the I people. And my book is a manifesto for the I people. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much. So hopefully that triggered some questions, and yeah. Oh, sorry, Karen. Were you? Okay.
And be very quick and out the door. So if we can just pick 3, can we go one here?
I'll let you do it. Yeah,
one there. I'm sorry to be the boss of this, and then we'll jump back to the other half.
Hi, thanks very much for that.
Where are you from?
I'm from the UK.
Okay.
I work just around the corner.
Oh, great.
Thank you for that. You talked about the dynamics of exponential growth, which was really interesting.
Yeah.
I think one thing maybe you missed out. Oh, there we go. I'll just try and be loud.
Mm-hmm.
Was returns to capital and the way that they function exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So to me, the story you told about AT&T was a story of ever more value being extracted from an increasingly precarious workforce.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And why do companies do this? It's because they have more relative and absolute power than they ever have before. the logic of production at zero marginal cost facilitates the emergence of corporate monopolies. And the people that fund those corporate monopolies own increasing amounts of capital. They're able to reap the returns of exponential growth and reinvest that. On the other hand, those at what you were talking about at the bottom are suffering from the opposite of that, which is a crisis of debt as more is extracted out of them and they are less able to own assets themselves. And they also don't have the power to resist because their organizing power has been systematically undermined by generations of working between government and corporations. And I think the reason that Bernie was talking about the banks was because if we don't rethink the ownership of capital in the context of exponential growth, then the gap between those who have and those who don't have will increase exponentially too. So I was wondering your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Can we take the other two questions, lady here and
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Abby, also from the UK. Sorry, I feel like
You're from the UK also?
I'm from the UK as well. But so I run a technology company and I also care deeply about safety nets. So I think I sit in the middle of that Venn diagram. And you've painted really fascinating talk, quite a rosy picture of the pace of technological change and how this has the potential to really kind of emancipate humanity. What I have seen in Silicon Valley is not quite as rosy. I think that there is a real...
Not sure my picture was that rosy, but...
a real, or at least a kind of optimistic, applied hope perspective of what technology can do. And I feel there is a real resistance to government, a dismissal of policy, and a kind of almost hate of regulation. So I was wondering what your thoughts are about the kind of darker elements of how technology is progressing, a lack of algorithmic accountability, the fact that algorithms make decisions based on race and gender, but operate under this banner of objectivity, and just what your thoughts are about how we can start to address some of those challenges.
Perfect, thank you. Let's make sure we get some non-UK.
Sorry, you're from the UK too, you've just been banned.
Please. Sorry.
Thank you so much, first of all. I enjoyed every second of your talk.
Thank you.
You spoke about how the digital divide is disappearing and projected in the next 5 years, you see that disappearing. I'm like a wave of dismay, just went over me. Nigeria. Because in Nigeria, we barely have internet access. I've worked in states where basically the only way you can have access is through your phone, which limits what you can consume. So my question then is, like, in your research, have you come across what this digital divide will mean for the global South countries like Nigeria? Do you see potentially a new colonization? For example, I was speaking to a friend of mine, Victoria, who was telling me how in Kenya, I think the trains were coded by, is it the Chinese? And so, like, what have you seen as far as the new colonization? And then the second question I have is more personal. What podcast do you listen to? Who do you like to follow on Twitter?
Sure. Okay.
That'd be great.
Okay, so let me just sort of do these in reverse order so I can remember them. Don't tell anybody this. I'll just keep it between us. I actually don't look at Twitter. I don't look at Facebook. And I've never smoked a cigarette. And my plan is to die saying all three. What is that about? I actually know who my friends are, and they're not a thumb up or a thumb down. And so I talk the talk of globalization, I do not walk the walk. The subtext of my book is that the things that matter most today are all the things you cannot download. They're all the things you have to upload the old-fashioned way. Good parenting to good child, good teacher to good student, good government to good citizen, good preacher to good flock. So my book is actually a celebration of everything old and slow. Because I think actually the faster the world gets, the more all these old and slow values, the golden rule, they're actually going to matter more than ever. And so I'm not a fan, actually, of social networks. I read online, I read newspapers online, I really enjoy that. I've actually never listened to a podcast. I've been in a lot of them. I've even been to Facebook, and I'm not on Facebook. I've been there twice, and I'm not on Facebook. So I'm actually a really, I have a cell phone, I keep in touch, obviously, with email, but I really try to keep it real. I'm a very analog person, and I really appreciate all my analog encounters, and I am not, I just don't live a digital life. As much as I can avoid it. Both of your questions were related. So we're in the middle of a credible transition right now. I just did a piece 2 weeks ago about Facebook and this whole question of our elections and how easily their algorithms were gamed. But I'm deeply worried about the size of these companies. I'm kind of glad there's an EU out there. As an American, finding these companies, because there's a very different ethic in Europe, you know, about these, about monopoly now. These companies came on so fast, it's really back to my graph, that we have not been able to legislate or regulate them. They've grown so big now. And there's a real fear I have that they become so big that they now have the power to lobby to prevent them from being regulated. And you know, I've been know Jeff Bezos, I really like him, but it freaks me out that Amazon just bought Whole Foods, the biggest grocery store in America. I kind of like my corner grocery store. I like my corner bookstore. And so a lot is being lost here that I think is really worrisome. And certainly the income gap thing is part of it. I'm a little more optimistic that we will find work and we will find people will have incomes. You know, I'm a little suspicious when I read these studies that say 47.3% of all current jobs will be gone by 2050. Because when I hear that, I think 47.3, not 47.4, not 47.2. Who knows what jobs are going to be around, okay, in 2050? I mean, and so I'm a little bit more optimistic about that. Do you know what was the most popular restaurant chain in America in 2015? It's a restaurant chain called Paint Night. You know what it does? It's paint by numbers for adults in bars. Turns out that adults actually love to get together and paint by numbers and have a drink at the same time. And artists draw up the outlines, and for $200 a night, they conduct paint by numbers classes. And so there's a lot more going on. If you just think of work as we thought it before, I'm a factory worker, I was in a union, that's over, you know. But there's a lot of other stuff happening that leaves me a little more optimistic, but we have to be on top of it with the right government regulations, and that's a lot of what my Mother Nature political party was about. Remind me again, your sort of, what was the thrust of it? No.
Just that technology is quite biased and power is being consolidated.
Exactly, absolutely, yeah. And it's really, and it's a little bit why I'm never going to get my news feed from Facebook. I do not want it tailored to me. If you ask me what one website, news site, go to, I actually go to Real Clear Politics. It's called Real Clear Politics, and the reason I like it is it gives you left, right, and center. So I can read selections of what the left, the center left, the far left is doing, the right, you know, and the far right. I like to get, you know, my news, you know, as much as I can from a wide variety of sources. But
also, I suppose, about the way the algorithms make decisions because they are using proxies and they appear to be objective, whereas
right.
they suggest that they're making decisions objectively, but they are making racist perspectives, etc.
Oh, it's even worse. I actually give an example in the book about how YouTube was running Jennifer Aniston perfume ads on ISIS videos. Okay, and of course, no person was doing it. The algorithm was noticing a lot of young men were coming to these videos. And so, and beer ads and Jennifer Aniston perfume. We're letting algorithms do things we never let them do before. So that's why I try to keep it real myself.
Can I just say thank you again to Thomas?
Pleasure.